2023. The role of... Everybody turn your microphones on, by the way. The role of the Planning Commission is to hold workshops to review and make recommendations to the City Council on all manner of policy and legislative activities. In some cases, we act as a quasi-judicial board for land use cases, which can then be appealed to either the council, the hearings examiner, or a court. We won't be doing that this evening. Melissa, would you call roll?
Tel Jensen,
I'm here.
Brian Matson,
Present.
Sharon Watt,
Present.
Shauna Gawthorne, Robin Zorich.
Here.
Okay. Moving right along. At this point, is there anybody has anything to, any public comment for something that's not on the agenda? Okay, and we will, for items that are on the agenda, we'll kind of take comment as we get to them. So if you'll bear with me, we got more folks here than usual, which is great. Please help yourselves to donuts. And next up is approving the agenda. We like the agenda?
I move that we approve the agenda.
Second.
All right, motion's been made and seconded to approve the agenda as written. Any discussion? All right, anyone opposed to the agenda as it is written? Motion carries. Moving right along to the minutes of our last meeting, July 20th, 2023. Anybody have anything to say about the minutes?
I would move to approve them, but I wasn't here.
Makes no difference to me.
I move that we approve the minutes.
All right, fantastic.
I second it.
Okay, motion's been made and seconded. Anybody find any issues? I did not. There was apparently an egregious one from previous.
It's
minutes,
been rectified.
but that's been rectified.
Yeah.
Great news. All right.
Okay.
In that case, anyone opposed to the minutes as written in our July 20th meeting? All right. Motion carries. Great work. Moving on to public hearing, which I don't have my little cheat sheet for. Got one of those?
Sorry, I will pull up the...
You'd think I'd have this figured out by now.
You don't have it memorized, huh?
I don't. They coddle me. They give me these notes, so.
It was up on the screen.
Well, it's just, it's the. Oh, I got one of those. Basically, no, yeah, I want to know, anybody have any ex parte communication they need to disclose before we
Nope.
move on to this next item, which is WLD-2023-0005, multifamily zoning text amendment request. All right, opening the public hearing on that item, and I believe we've got a staff report.
Thank you very much. For the record, my name is Travis Goddard. I'm the Community Development Director for the City of Woodland. And what you have before you is a request for a recommendation on a zoning text amendment. The section that we are going to be talking about is 17.20.020 for principal permitted uses in the multi-family zoning district, which includes both the MDR, the medium density residential, and the HDR, the high density residential zoning district. And specifically, they're requesting subsection E, which currently says one single family dwelling on each building lot. And they are asking for it to say one single family detached dwelling on each lot. Sorry, it says building site as opposed to lot. And they're asking for the both the addition of detached and the clarification of lot. And so the definition for single family dwelling already defines detached units. A single family detached unit is included in the definition. But they do ask for lot to be placed there instead of building site. That actually makes sense because a lot has a building site on it, and in a single-family residential zone, a lot is essentially a building site, so you're entitled to one single-family dwelling per lot, which is the same as a building site. Now, if this was a site plan and they were doing a building with multi-family units, you might have a site plan with building sites for more than one unit, but that wouldn't be applicable for single-family dwellings. So they are, in a sense, the same thing, and so our code might just be using antiquated language because a lot and a building site are essentially the same thing for single-family purposes. So any questions about that code change? My staff report, I actually recommend not making the detached, but adding the second lot change.
Can you refresh my memory? What are the like the townhouses? Those aren't detached. Are they each on their own lot, or are they?
So in the case of townhomes, you would have one dwelling per lot, but they are considered attached dwellings. So they're single family attached dwellings. And you're only going to have one per lot. Otherwise, it would be an apartment.
You allow townhomes on multifamily projects if it meets density.
Yes, and both the high density and multifamily allow for multiple units of multifamily on a building site or a lot. So,
So they just want to be able to do the same thing, but not share walls.
yeah.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
I don't know. So when we're done here, you can ask the applicant
All right.
because they'll make the second presentation.
Okay, fantastic.
Okay, so if you don't have any additional questions, the next thing that they are looking at, and they are asking to apply single-family homes on individual lots to also be included in the townhouse section. So they're asking just for clarification of the title of 080. And they are asking for a minimum lot size of square feet of 1,600 square feet from 1,900 square feet. And they're asking for a minimum lot width of 20 feet instead of 24 feet. And so really, when you look at section 070, which they didn't ask to change, but when you actually look at the code, what the code says is in the multifamily zone, if you're going to do single-family dwellings on a regular straight-up subdivision, the minimum lot size would be 7,500 square feet, which is essentially a equivalent of our LDR 7.5 zoning district. So basically what our code says is our multifamily zone is actually a single family zone. We're just going to pretend it's a multifamily zone. So the density in our multifamily zone is 5.8 units per acre, even though it says clearly on line B that you can go up to 25 or 35 units per acre. So in a sense, our code requires single-family low-density zoning if you're going to build anything other than townhomes or apartments. And oddly enough, there is a third line in this which talks about the net square feet of lot area per dwelling. So if you're doing an apartment, you can, or townhome, you can get down to, well, in this case, if you do apartments, you can get down to 1,740 square feet or 1,240 square feet. So in other words, if you have a big lot, landscaping and parking, the equivalent number of units that you can get, which is basically 25 or 35 units per acre, if you build up, is determined by that 1,240 and 1,740 on average. So that's how you figure out how many units you can get on an acre.
Travis,
Yep.
when you say net, I think you explained it. Net net is takeaway parking, required landscaping. Do you have a rec area requirement here too?
Yep.
Is that taken out? Because I'm wondering how much land is left after you take out everything that you're required to put in. There's not much left, right?
Yes, yeah. And so the answer to that is when you shrink all of that down to a little square foot, how many units can you put on that little square foot? And the answer is 25 to 35 units per acre equivalent. So you could do 1 unit 35 stories tall theoretically, or three stories of eight
Okay, I'm
units.
missing something. Where's the 1740 come in then?
So, and part of what I'm doing with this
You
one,
probably explained
and
it and I just didn't catch it. I apologize.
yeah, so if you take an acre, which is what I've got down below, the 43,560, when you divide it by the number of net, that's how you get the density units per acre. So this number, oh, you can't see my arrow. Oh, yes, you can. So this number is actually
So that's maybe a gross number and not a.
acreage divided by that.
So that 1740 isn't a controlling standard. You're just showing how much.
It's not.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm with you now.
But
I'm
you're,
with you now.
but you are exactly where I'm going, because what I point out here is they're asking for townhomes to be allowed on smaller lot sizes that would allow them to get into the density range, but they're asking us to do it in the townhome code. And what I'm actually recommending is that instead of going into the townhome code, 40 minimum, not 1600 minimum, and in the high density, it would be 1240, not the 1600 that they've proposed. And so it might be easier for us to just simply eliminate the low density residential mandate so that people can build mixed housing stock in our higher density and get higher densities.
So the low density will still just be controlled by lot size, not density.
Yep.
Not acreage, okay.
Yep.
That making sense then, Dave?
Makes sense to me.
And then the other aspect that they're asking for is to go from a minimum width of 20 square feet to, or 24 width to 20 feet. And later on, what they're talking about is minimum side yard reductions and street front yard reductions. And really the code, I mean, with modern architects and designs, skinny homes and skinnier units are more normal, and so the 4 feet isn't necessarily a significant amount, because you could do 3-foot side yards and do fire retardant siding, and you could reduce the setbacks by 4 feet just by doing improved building construction standards to reduce the setbacks in the side yard. So
I'm assuming fire personnel's here to talk about sprinklers being required when they lower the setbacks?
he's actually here for the second
okay.
project, but he may have a comment on that if you want to ask him.
I don't mean to put you on the spot if you don't have, it's okay.
Yeah,
Can you come to the mic? Because the people at home can't hear very well. Thank you.
yeah, we haven't looked at this specifically. Currently for residents,
I'm
pretty well.
concerned about a fire ripping through them all, just being 6 feet apart then.
Well,
As long as they have the siding.
Yeah, with the siding and limited building openings, and that stuff is fortunate, it's addressed by the, not so much in zoning, but addressed by the building and fire codes to address that specifically. So,
Okay,
so,
thank you.
yeah, thank you.
Sorry, Travis, I'm sorry I keep derailing.
Oh,
you.
no,
I'm
that's
just
fine.
making sure I understand.
So if you had any other questions on that? Okay. Now, this is the other aspect that they are requesting changes for, and that is the minimum front yard setback for all buildings and structures 10 feet from the property line on a local access street and 20 feet from collector streets. Now, there is, as far as I know, I took a quick look. There is no high-density multifamily or medium family that would have a front yard on a collector where they would be allowed to have driveways onto the collector. So, for example, State Route 503, there's a medium density on State Route 503, but the state would not allow us to approve a subdivision that has multiple driveways along State Route 503. They would have to do an internal access road, and that internal access road would have the 10-foot setback for the living space, but they include the minimum front yard setback for garages would still be 20 feet. So there would still be on-site parking in the garage and on-site parking on the driveway. It's just that the front of the house, whether it's a front room, whether it's a front covered porch, will stick out into the front yard to 10 feet from the property line. So instead of having a snout house with a big old garage sticking out, what you're going to have is the garage set back, and the front porch, the front entryway, or the front room would stick out into the front yard instead. The rear yard minimum, the rear yard setback 10 feet and side yard changes. So I go into each one of these. So the front yard, theoretically, it will reduce the amount of snout houses with prominent garages. It moves living space towards the street, which is a little more typical with our older neighborhoods. You actually have smaller houses that are closer to the street. It preserves parking in front of the garage, and as long as you can prove site distance at the building permit, there shouldn't be a reason why you shouldn't be able to safely back out of your garage or driveway without being able to see clearly up and down both directions of the street. So that's a recommendation that I make. So for the rear yard setback, they're asking to go from 15 feet to 10 feet. Now, typically, rear yards are considered kind of the privacy space for the homeowners, but you have to recognize that smaller lots come with smaller trade-offs, and people who are privacy conscious will not necessarily be buying smaller lots if they have a choice in the market. So there is a trade-off, and it typically comes with higher density means smaller lots, less privacy, and you design your home, or you close your windows, close your blinds, you design your landscaping to provide you privacy that wouldn't necessarily be an issue if you were buying a 10,000 square foot lot instead of a 3,000 square foot lot or 5,000 square foot lot. So they tend to self-select themselves. If they can't live like that, they don't buy in that neighborhood. And then the side yard section, what they're asking for is some reductions from, again, if they have frontage on both ends, so they internal street, but their backyard is also a street or a side street, then they have what are called street side yards, and so they're asking for those to be reduced. And again, the minimum side yard setback for detached single-family homes shall be 5 feet or 10 feet from a street side yard. And the building code again allows for reduced setbacks by improving fire protection standards, and reduced setbacks are the minimum to allow for flexible site design. So the market is currently building houses on smaller lots in other markets, and so this would allow the flexibility that other markets are bearing. Any questions? So that's the end of my presentation. So if the applicant's here, they can come up and anything they
Questions for
want to
Travis
say.
before we hear from the applicant?
I don't.
Just so that I'm clear, the proposal is asking for a 15-foot front setback. So your driveway will only be 15 feet from the garage to the back of the sidewalk. Is that correct?
The code currently has 15, and they're asking to go to 10
For the
for
driveway?
living space, 20 for garage.
Oh, okay.
So it's a
Okay.
give and take.
20, you have 20 for the, okay. Okay, I'm glad I asked. I don't have any further questions.
Okay, great. Thanks, Travis.
Okay.
Is the applicant here, want to have a chat with us? Well, that's too bad. That's
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
online. Shoot.
Yeah, sorry, Travis Goddard. You need anything?
Yeah,
Oh, Go
I
ahead.
I apologize, Planning Commission. I didn't know we were going to speak tonight. I was just going to get on and listen. I don't have anything formal to present, but we submitted the code change, and I think Mr. Goddard did a good job of editing it and making changes to it to make it fit the City of Woodland code. The challenge with the code and the MDR and the HDR is you've got townhouse section of the code which doesn't apply to detached single family, and I think the only question I heard tonight was, well, why? Well, people want detached homes. They don't want townhomes. The market's kind of changing a little bit. Attached units are a little bit more challenging. And not just that, townhomes create a challenge for maintenance where siding's overlapping, roofing is overlapping. You got to work with your neighbors. You got cross easements for foundation drains. When you've got a detached single family home, it eliminates all that, and it gives homeowners their own home to maintain where you're not dealing with neighbors. It's just a better option, and that's why we're proposing this code change to allow these single family detached homes in the same format that you would allow an attached townhome. The other changes, which I think I hear Mr. Matson's voice. I didn't know he was part of the Planning Commission. Is that you,
Yes,
Mr. Matson?
it is, Travis.
I think Brian's pretty familiar with the small lot code, and I don't think the applicant is asking for anything that's pushing the limits. We're asking for 10-foot side yard setbacks from the streets, which is pretty common. We're asking for 5-foot side yard setbacks in between units, which creates a 10-foot setback between the units, 5 to the lot line, another 5 to the home. And we're asking for 10 foot to the living quarters and 20 foot to the garage. A lot of codes go for 18 foot to the garage, but what we found is most cars will hang over into the sidewalk and cause issues. I've always been against it. I think you need to have a good 20 foot setback to the garage to get a car parked there. And then last but not least, we're asking for a 10 foot rear yard setback. And I think Mr. Goddard's right in that if people are looking for a 10,000 square foot home, they have that option. But there's a lot of people that want to purchase a home nowadays that just can't afford a home. And this gives them the opportunity that I had and everybody on the commission to buy a first time home. It gets them in the market. And I've got, number of engineers in our office that can't afford a home here in Clark County. So we're not asking for anything that's out of the normal that are in other agencies. We did look at fire protection and 10 foot between homes. You don't have to sprinkle the home. It does provide the fire protection, and I think I heard Mr. Jackson tonight. I think he can talk about that too. But if there's any other questions that the commissioners may have, we'll be more than happy to answer them.
All right.
I would like to know the identity of these people. Who is this who's speaking?
I am totally sorry.
I can see
I
you
did not
before the
introduce
commission.
myself. I am terribly sorry. My name is Travis Johnson. I work at PLS Engineering. I represent the applicant. We're an engineering firm in the city of Vancouver. We're local. And to give you a history, we do have an approved 250 lot apartment complex on the property. And it's approved. And during the hearing, there were a couple council members that weren't happy about it. and there were a lot of neighbors that weren't happy about it either. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to please everybody in this process. And a lot of people spoke during that hearing. Even the council members spoke about traffic issues on Lewis River Highway. So what we've done is we're trying to make this project work where we can downsize it to around 80 lot subdivision instead of doing the 250 unit apartment complex. And looking through the code, we know that we can do it with the townhouse project, but we'd prefer not to do townhomes. We'd prefer to do detached single family homes. And that's the reason for the code change. Do you guys need my address for the record?
No.
Sure don't.
No. I'm sorry for not introducing myself.
So I take it that the applicant is a builder?
So the applicant that's correct. But they are not making a project-specific or a site-specific request. They are making a code change request so that they could apply it on a project site.
Any more questions for the applicant right now? I think you're gonna stay on the line, yeah, Travis, so we can bother you a little bit.
Yes, sir. We would have been there in person if we knew we were presenting tonight. And I am terribly sorry about that. I did not know that we were
Donuts is
presenting.
good, man. You're missing out. Okay. Not hearing any more questions for you, but we may have some later. So, thank you, Travis. All right. At this point, I'm going to open public testimony. Anyone hoping to give public comment on this agenda item?
I'm not for it.
You want to come up?
Yeah, come on up. I'll give you 3 minutes to say that.
My name is Maggie Smith, a Woodland resident for, I don't know how long. Anyway, I've seen a lot of changes, and the traffic is the worst, but City of Woodland doesn't seem to be able to stop the building. And our city council members don't listen to what we want. We've asked them not to. These apartments, I don't know how they're going to figure out the flooding, because when we flooded, that field was completely underwater. Our traffic, I sit at the end of Gun Club Road trying to make a right-hand turn. The field that they're proposing was going to be apartments, but now it's multi-townhouses or what have you. I don't know. I'm not for it. I'm not sorry. I just don't feel that that is a good thing. Coming off of Lewis River on the road onto Gun Club, we have cluster homes. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but there's just a road, and these houses are all bunched up together, and they can't park on the street, and it's just a mishmash, and I don't like it. Sorry.
All right. Thank you. Come on up. Yeah, I'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay. So I'm Donna Butler and live here in Woodland, and I'm glad that they're wanting to reduce the number of residents in that. Did I hear that correctly? They are approved for the 250 apartment complexes. That's already been given to them, permitting?
That's what the applicant said.
Right. And it's been approved?
Travis was
Yes.
It has been?
Yep.
Okay, they met the requirements put forth for the water lines and all that?
Yes.
Okay, so I'd rather have 80 in there than 250. I'd rather, though, that they had this be a project change in code rather than a code change for our whole city. So I'm understanding they're wanting all, yeah. And just, I think it'd be good for the City of Woodland to be able to look at each project as it's being built and decide, is this a good neighborhood considering traffic and other housing in the neighborhood? Would that be a good fit? Because I have friends that live in these kind of places. And like what she said, the road, there's no parking. You got to go down the end, and then they just have a little parking. They call them single-family homes, but they're not family-friendly in that they have no yards for children, and there's not a playground. And so, anyway, and I'm wondering if this is supposed to be a solution for the affordable housing that they're trying to get. But my friend they rent it. So a lot of these homes ends up being rentals rather than purchases. People I know rent it in these neighborhoods. And you're looking at $2,400 a month. So that's a lot. That's right up there in Ridgefield, that new one right behind the new Tractor Supply. And they're nice units, but they just have these tiny, like Travis said, privacy spaces, whatever. So, and they have place for dogs, but not children. So I think we know what clientele that that it is providing for. So I just would like it to be right on their project, if you can make some amendment or whatever for that, rather than the whole city opening it up for that. Okay? I think that was it, yeah.
All right, thanks so much. Anyone else like to give comment?
I would just like to clarify, in light of her comments, that this is just for the multifamily residential zone. So that is medium density and high density residential zones. Low density residential zones would remain with our current minimum lot sizes, which I believe for the smallest would be 6,000 square feet.
Thank you, David. Yep, sorry. You're out of time, Tom. All right, thanks so much. Anyone else want to give comments?
Are there a lot of other places within the city limits where this would impact?
I can think of a total of 3 properties that this would apply to.
3 more than what's going on right now?
No. 3 properties, 3 total properties that this would affect.
Okay.
I'd like to say something.
Come on up. I'm gonna give you 3 minutes.
Okay, I've lived here.
Hold on, don't stop. Don't start talking till you get that.
I'm Jean Shaw, and I've lived here 70-plus years. When I moved here, it was a very small town, and I loved it. I knew everybody. Now I know nobody. I don't understand why we'd have to have more and more and more building. Why can't we have a small town? I would like to see codes changed where they can't do all this building without, we didn't have any say on it, and we never have any say because they listen to us, but they do what they want to anyway. So that's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. All right. Anyone else interested? This is your shot. It works best if you have things to say, so don't be shy. All right. Last chance. Okay. Fantastic. Travis, do you have anything else to add before we start a little confab up here?
No.
Okay. In that case, I'm going to close public testimony, and commission, we can deliberate. So, everybody, initial thoughts. Robin, haven't heard from you yet.
Well, it would always be nice to have larger spaces, larger yards and stuff like that for people. But you can see over Clark County, over the, the bigger cities where you need more housing. So I don't think that this is out of line. I mean, we're going to have more people come in anyway, so.
Yeah, we build more houses. Just saying, I'm sorry, but that's the way I feel. If we keep building,
I
we're going to
appreciate
bring more
it.
and more in.
Thanks so much. We really value your input, but we got it. we're gonna talk amongst ourselves now. We're not gonna be as exciting as you are, but just for moving things along.
So I don't see how you can get around it. I mean, we need housing, we need lower cost for housing, so I think we're kind of stuck with it.
So you're leaning towards making the amendments that
Yes.
staff is recommending. Good. Thank you,
So,
Travis.
you probably already know what I'm gonna say, but these code changes that they're asking for are not anything more drastic or permissive than anywhere that I'm used to. They're pretty standard in nature, to be honest. And I appreciate the growing pains that Woodland is going through. I experience the same traffic you do. I'm not a big fan of it either. But there are certain things that are inevitable. Under state law, you have to plan for a certain level of growth. If you were to shrink the city and then somebody drives over a fire hydrant, you'd go bankrupt trying to replace the fire hydrant. I believe something similar to that happened not too long ago. If we're gonna have growth, I'd prefer we had it within the city limits, so it's not so spread out, so maybe the traffic's a little better. And when we have growth within the city, every unit you sell pays a traffic impact fee that goes to traffic only, a school impact fee that goes to the school district, and also parks. You have a parks here too? Parks also that goes to parks, obviously. If you don't allow that growth, the growth is gonna happen anywhere outside the city limits, and as you know, you can't get to the freeway without driving through Woodland. So any development outside the city still has to come through Woodland, still has to jam up our property, but that's not really what we're talking about. I mean, there's always competing interests between growth and keeping the way things say work, but I kind of got off the rails there, sorry. But as far as the code changes, I don't believe they're drastic. I believe they're in line with everything else. And the result of this will be less units, less people on the roads than the 250 unit apartment complex, so that should appeal to you at least in some degree.
Okay. Deep breaths. Sure.
So I know everybody is concerned about traffic, but people are also concerned about like water and sewer rates. And tell me if I'm wrong about this, but you know, the more people you have living within the city limits are helping to pay for the rates, right?
Yeah, so it just in general, a denser development is gonna use less infrastructure, so per person expenses will go down. Yeah, that's true. Okay. That's all good. I think got some good thoughts, good ideas. Just sort of getting down to practical bits of it. Could we, you know, you were talking about just getting rid of the minimum lot size. Would it make sense to instead just make that a maximum lot size?
So that is theoretically another way to do it. Now, doing it this way would mean that they don't necessarily have to go through the townhome standards, but their suggested change would also get you the same effect.
Okay, so yeah, so we're, you know, thinking, we have, like you said, not much medium density or high density land in the city. And it is a part of our, you know, how we are required to accommodate the state demographers like population growth, yeah? Okay, so that being the case.
Well, I'm sorry, can I clarify that?
Please do, yeah.
Development at this density will not accommodate our growth projections.
Okay, so even
Regardless.
this is not enough.
Yes, whether you approve this or not, the city will not meet its growth projections.
Okay, so that's kind of, as I see it, that's kind of the unfortunate reality that we are working with. you know, my family's from Woodland for 5 generations now. I'm aware of how much it's changed in recent years. But everything changes everywhere, and unfortunately, or fortunately, that's going to be a constant. You know, some of the roads that we're talking about, for example, Gun Club Road. Why is it named Gun Club Road? Is there a gun club there anymore?
There was.
There was.
You don't remember that?
I do remember it, but it's not there anymore.
It's not
You know,
there anymore.
Slaughterhouse Corner. There's no slaughterhouse there anymore. Things change. And I don't think, you know, we should endure drastic change like overnight in our neighborhoods. I don't think that's good for quality of life. I don't think it's good for the economy of the city. I just don't think it's great. But I also don't think we can just preserve things in amber the way they are. So we got to find a middle ground, and we have to do our best to, you know, meet these requirements for planning. And I think trying to, you know, craft this code so that it makes something that makes sense, and, you know, it's never going to work for everybody, but works for the most folks and achieves the goals of the community is what we are tasked with. And in this case, I think because we have so little MDR and HDR, like, I want to make that, I don't want to just get rid of it. I want to flip it over and make that the maximum lot size instead, because we have so little land dedicated to higher density. I don't think we can really squander it by allowing that larger lot size. And 7,500 square feet is still, that's pretty big. So I don't think that's gonna be terribly constraining for any projects. So I don't know, how's that sounding to everybody? Maybe it's totally unnecessary.
What is, I understand preserving some of the high-density stuff for higher density development, but what is a maximum lot size? How does that achieve that?
It means because they can't, you know, so
In
right
lieu of
now,
not having a minimum density, is that what you're saying?
because we
Does it
don't
work the same?
enforce the density, right?
Yeah.
That's our target. Whereas if we said, you know, and this 7,500 square feet wouldn't get us anywhere close to the density that's our target, but it would at least put a cap on.
It's an essential limit on minimum density.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm okay with it.
Yeah, and it's, you know, it's definitely, we've never done that before. We don't have any maximum lot size anywhere. So that's new. But I think in this case, on these few limited zones, I mean, it seems like makes sense.
It would prevent somebody, if they wanted to abuse that high density and build 3 1-acre lots with a single family home on
Exactly.
each of it, it would squander a lot of that property that could
Exactly.
be better used for density.
Yes.
That's what you're getting at.
Yes.
Okay.
So that's one thought I had, and yeah, curious to hear about that. I was also thinking about the rear setback and a 20 by 80 foot lot. And I immediately think, what if we said, okay, that's fine, but if you rear load these, then you can have a 0 foot setback.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
If a lot is rear loaded, give like no setbacks in the rear. Can we do that?
So for example, if we were talking about the property that has the apartment approval on it, they're talking about doing an internal loop, and there will be some lots that back up to Lewis River Road. And the city code automatically requires a 10-foot extra landscaping along Lewis River Road. So there's automatically a built-in 10-foot minimum rear yard that has to be landscaped along Lewis River Road. But there are no other lots that would apply to. So essentially, the only project we're talking about is Lewis River Road, and it would be essentially what you have for the bird homes, the bird houses on River Rock, River Rock.
But there are still rear setback requirements.
15 feet. They're
Okay.
currently set back 15 feet.
Right, so I'm saying, why don't we eliminate that if it's rear loaded?
Oh, you could.
You talking about only townhomes or detached single family?
Not really.
You're not talking about apartments, right? I mean, because
Yeah.
that doesn't, rear setback doesn't really apply to anything on the interior of apartments except the perimeter of the site, so.
Yeah, so, yeah, I'm thinking detached homes and townhomes, so like, yeah.
That's already kind of a thing in Clark County code. It's not
Yeah.
unheard of.
So I'm just, I'm looking for ways to, because I think, yeah, I don't know, I'm just looking for ways to make this a little more aesthetically pleasing for everybody who doesn't live in these places. Because they get, the people who live there, they get to make their choice whether they want to buy it or not, or rent it or not. Everybody else, is just, gets to look at it. And I, maybe this is my own weird bias here, but like, I just think alleys work so much better. It seems like a much better use of space, and I don't know. I like them. I think they're efficient. So I want to do things to encourage them. I don't know how everybody else feels about that. And I feel, basically what I'm getting at is, if we can say, okay, you would lose this property, for building space because you have to have a setback, and we'll say, okay, if you do it in this certain form, then we'll give you that back.
I don't dislike the idea, but what I want to be cognizant of, and it's not that I want to cater to everybody, every builder or every consultant that wants to do anything, but they tend to build things they can sell, and they can only sell things that people want. Right?
Okay,
So if
I'm going to
you-
push
if-
back against
if
that.
you
I don't
want-
believe that.
if
But
Maybe they want that instead of just an alley-faced garage.
sure, and this wouldn't be requiring that. This would be saying, hey, if you do it this way, you can have lot line. You can build right up against the lot line. And I understand everyone says that builders only, build what the market demands. I don't believe that's true. I don't think it's ever been true. I think builders build what's profitable, and they kind of make their own market.
Well, there's a
Everyone's-
few.
everyone's free to disagree with me.
There's a few cars I can think of that prove your point, but I think.
Let's see, and then so that moving from 24 to 20 feet minimum width, I guess it's just like the proportions of that kind of seem all wrong to me. Like, I'd be more inclined to reduce the 80-foot minimum depth than the width. I don't know if there's, so maybe go. It seems kind of small.
They're
doesn't it?
narrow, they're shotgun-style homes.
Yeah, and which is, like, narrow's okay in the right context, but it's just like, if a lot is 20 feet wide and we're going 5 feet from either side, in the setback, you got a 10-foot wide house. And that's not much. And it seems like, I don't know. I guess I'm inclined to, allow the smaller lot size, but I would rather get there by chopping it off the 80 than the 24. Maybe go 24 by 65, and then you got like a 1,600-foot lot size, roughly the same. I'm sure there are, again, reasons that a builder would not prefer that.
And now that I think about it, I may need, when this goes to the city council, I may need to take a look at the maximum lot coverage.
That was my next question for you,
Because-
that's gonna have to shift if you're gonna lower your setbacks.
Okay. All right. I think those were my thoughts. I don't know if they were at all coherent to the rest of you, but curious how mad at me you are.
Not bad. I'm still gonna move to support the request.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know. Anybody? Sharon, have any thoughts on that? Robin?
Well, I see your point about the going to the 24 by 64 but I mean, doesn't it depend on the builder? I mean, maybe it shouldn't, but.
Builders don't write our code as much as they would like to.
That's true.
You know, and I think all too often we kind of basically let them.
Let them do what they want.
Yeah.
So-
And, you know, they
so
have a lot of
what-
expertise, and that's important. I don't think we should discount that. But they're, at the end of the day, you know, their interest has to be their business and not our community.
And so what would, it just aesthetics for the 24 by 64 instead of the 20 by 80?
I want to have an argument that it goes beyond aesthetics. I mean, that it is more efficient as far as like building materials because you know you have less. Basically, the closer you get to a sphere, the more efficient you are with materials. So potentially, there's an argument to be made there. Also for you know heating and cooling. Those aren't going to be huge impacts, I don't think. So yeah, I guess it's just, you know, something about having, you got a 10-foot wide home, and you're going to have a 10-foot wide garage there, you know, and it's like just garage after garage after garage, driveway after driveway. That doesn't, I don't think that's conducive to a community that's like nice to be outside in. I think that might be a perfectly comfortable home to live inside of, but if you want to walk to your neighbors, if you want to walk down to the store, or if somebody else wants to just walk through on a public right of way, it's not nice.
I don't think that a lot of high-density apartment complexes are gonna give you the same feel, but we are talking about high-density housing. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not as pretty as some of your more spread-out, single-family detached. And it's,
It is, it's delightful. There's no garages in the front. Okay. Yeah, please.
So having thought through this while you're talking through that, I'm not sure that eliminating the minimum lot size of 7,500 square feet would accomplish the same thing. So the applicant's proposal for changing section 080, so that's this request here,
Yeah.
is the most viable to avoid the 50% lot coverage, because that does not apply to townhomes, because by their virtue, there's no setbacks, no side yard setbacks, and it's more than 50% coverage. So what I thought might have been a smaller code change, in fact, creates problems that wouldn't work otherwise.
Okay, so clarification, I was kind of thinking both. So we would also change the minimum lot size and change the current minimum to the maximum.
Although the lot width is still a optional. You don't have to accept all of the requests. You could
Yeah.
recommend acceptance
Can
of
we-
some and not of others.
Yeah, how would everybody feel about, you know, I'm fine with 1,600. That seems fine to me. I'd even go to 1,500. But change to get there, change the minimum depth instead of minimum width.
So what does that do? Does that change the number of houses you can have in this space?
So it gets us closer to the, I think I calculated it at 24 units per acre. I can tell you that right now. $27 units per acre.
what do you wanna lower the depth
And
to?
that's a maximum. That's assuming that all lots are going to be the minimum lot size. I happen to know from the pre-application conference that only a small portion of them are constrained, and so they're looking for the smaller lot sizes for some of them. There
Okay.
will be others that are way more than 1,600.
Okay, what if we said 24 width and like, okay, leave it at 1600, say 24 width and 60 foot depth for minimums. How does that feel? So no, you know, you couldn't do the minimum both. If you did 60 foot depth, you would have to be wider than 24 to get to 1600. But that to me gives some more flexibility in what they can build without, 10-foot White House is, you know, just because they're getting built and sold, that doesn't mean much to me.
So if I may make a comment,
Please.
I think one of the reasons that people look at this and say you should lower the minimum width rather than the minimum depth necessarily is because it's a lot harder to build the infrastructure to add more layers rather than just adding more homes onto the lot. And so you get into these situations with, you know, these medium-sized lots which theoretically could be subdivided to meet, you know, the minimum lot size, but end up not being subdivided because they have to get variances for the lot width just to accommodate the access and the infrastructure and et cetera. So
You might have to draw me a picture of that for that to make any sense. I'm just not
Yeah.
seeing how that.
Think flag lots rather than parallel homes.
Yeah,
So actually, we have a great example of this just in the low-density residential zoning district that I'm actually reviewing now. It's out for comment. And it is, you know, bigger lots, but it's a larger lot in an established single-family residential neighborhood that they want to subdivide and into 5 or 6 lots. And one of their biggest limiting factors is that they just can't accommodate the access, the driveways to the rear lots without a variance to the minimum lot width. Because in a lot of these cases, you know, when you're talking about shallower lots, you either have to go to flag lots just to accommodate it, or you have to build excessive infrastructure to get a road to access those lots off of. So I think Travis is bringing that up.
Yeah, I guess I'm having a hard time seeing how allowing narrower lots is going to solve that problem.
For instance, in this zone, the minimum lot width is 60 feet. They're having to request a minor variance to the lot width to be able to get an actual driveway in between those front lots to subdivide the lots in the manner that our comprehensive plan and to the goal our comprehensive plan has for that zoning district. While if they were thinner lots, there'd be more flexibility to provide those driveways, to provide potentially that infrastructure to get to those rear lots.
Yeah, okay, so we're not, I appreciate that, and I think that's a reasonable point, David. I don't think that's the issue here, right? Nobody's going to be putting a driveway nobody's going to be putting a driveway on a 20-foot lot that they couldn't put on a 24-foot lot. I don't think they're going to, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think anybody's putting driveways right, you know, making flag lots on lots this small.
They likely wouldn't, but what that would lead to would be that those rear lots would just not be developed. They would either have extremely long, skinny lots because they can't justify actually subdividing those if they can't get access and if they have to build, say, an extra road just to accommodate those shallow lots.
All right, okay. I think I understand what you're saying. I think that's probably, you know, that may be true depending on the, like, specific lot in any case. Yeah, I don't know. I don't wanna hold this up too much longer. And I'm just one of us, so I would prefer to leave 24 and change 80, but it's not up to me, so. I guess, yeah, any more thoughts before we try to move ahead on this?
Change, I'll show you which
It
one.
doesn't apply to these.
Yeah, it doesn't,
Even the detached single family?
because townhomes don't have the same lot coverage
But
requirement.
detached single family is a townhomes attached.
Yeah.
We're talking about detached single family, the lot coverage won't apply to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this one is really, doesn't make a difference whether you approve it or not. The 1,600 and the 20 is what you're discussing. And then the various setback requests are the other one. So really there's kind of the three distinct components.
Okay. Did I, before we make a motion, just so we can hopefully get on the first or second or third try, did I convince anyone of any of my wackadoo ideas here? Which were, to remind you,
I don't think they're wackadoo.
oh, thank you, Brian.
Some of them are already part of code elsewhere.
Okay.
It's just not what they're asking for.
It's true, but what they're asking for and what we do don't have to be the same thing.
Correct.
So the first one was, actually giving them more than they wanted on a rear setback, provided that the lot is rear loaded. The second one was changing that 7,500 square foot minimum to a 7,500 square foot maximum. And then the third one was leaving 24 as the minimum width, but reducing the maximum depth to 60 feet.
Tell me what rear loaded is.
So that's basically, instead of having a garage or driveway in the front, you're having the back off an alley.
Which is, you're talking about alleys,
Yep.
yeah.
Well, I'm okay with most of your suggestions, whether you think they're wackadoo or not, Tel. But, so I'll go ahead. I move that we adopt the changes as requested, with the change that we allow a 0-foot rear setback if the lot is accessed by an alley, and that we incorporate a 7,500 square foot maximum lot size to prevent substandard density. And I do like the 20-foot wide. I'm going to recommend, I'm moving that we keep the 20-foot width reduction. The reduction to a minimum of 20 feet. There, I stumbled through it, but I hope you got that.
Was that clear?
So you want me to repeat that?
Sure.
Or sorry?
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
what you were
so, just to
asking?
make sure we got what.
So what I got is the motion to approve as proposed with the following changes. A 0 rear lot setback if accessed by an alley, 700 with a maximum of 7,500 lot instead of the minimum. So that's changing this to a maximum instead of a minimum. That would establish basically a minimum density of 5.8 with 20-foot width as proposed,
Correct.
which really doesn't need to be there because it was as proposed.
It doesn't, I was just clarifying because it was suggested otherwise.
Okay.
Because I was running my mouth. All right, so motion's been made.
Second.
Motion's been seconded. Any further discussion? All right, Alyssa, would you call a vote for us?
Sharon Watt,
Aye.
Robin Zorich,
Aye.
Tel Jensen,
Aye.
Brian Mattson.
Aye.
All right. Great job, everybody. I'll close that public hearing and move on to the next, which is retooling our code, minor code changes, WLD-2023-001. Has anybody had any ex parte communication or conflicts of interest to declare?
No.
No? Okay. I actually have on this one. I spoke to a business owner in town who's a friend of mine about the fire sprinkler issue. So when that one comes up, I'm probably going to
For
step out, I
which,
guess.
for
The-
which issue?
The sprinkler.
Sprinklers.
Yeah. And you're going to have to run the show, Brad. Sorry.
Okay.
Okay. So, got a staff presentation.
Yes, so we did a workshop on this in July, and essentially the language that is in your packet, and that is we are suggesting adding a performance standard, number 5, under section 1716.080, and that is to allow fences in side yards and reverse lot yards. The responsible official may approve a 6-foot fence on a lot line if the lot has multiple lot lines fronting on a street. Such fences shall meet the site distance requirements if not located in the front yard, and may only be approved if the fence fronts on one of the following streets. And those streets
Oh,
are...
okay, go back there. It's the, next to the bottom line, you read if, and it says is, which doesn't make sense.
Oh. Such fences
If
must
makes
meet
sense.
site distance. Yes, sorry about that. So that's an error in the slide. So I will make sure that says if in the actual code language. And this would apply to State Route 503, 5th Street, south of Davidson Avenue, South Pekin from 5th Street to the South City limits, North Gorg Street from East Scott Avenue. And I have pictures of all of these to help make sure we're all on the same page. And East Scott Avenue from Interstate 5 to Old Pacific Highway. So the ones that we had potentially talked about are Hillshire, Insel, and Gun Club. So to show you what we're talking about, this is State Route 503, and this is a 6-foot fence that is on the property line, in the case a rear property line, whereas this guy has a 3-foot fence because it is a sight distance issue when he tries to pull out of his driveway. So this lot would not be able to put in a 6-foot fence if it blocks his sight distance. Whereas this lot, it's a rear yard, so they would qualify to have a 6-foot fence in it. The Bird Homes are another example of a rear yard that has a 6-foot fence because it's not blocking the sight distance. This is the entry to River Mist, and you see that they also have a fence that's taller than allowed by code because it was required by SEPA as sound mitigation. So we have a disconnect in our code. This is on the corner of Gun Club, I believe it is. And you can see how they transition. They have a similar wall, but they were forced to transition from a 3-foot to a 6-foot as soon as they got out of the sight distance triangle.
The clear sight distance triangle that is, you can observe there,
Yep.
right through those bushes.
And in this case, I think it was considered a front yard setback, and they followed the code instead of ignoring the code, and so that's why there's a 3-foot fence. Now, whether those arborvitae are blocking the sight distance, that may be a code enforcement issue, not a code issue.
Okay. Where did we, no, sorry, you're not done.
Okay.
Go on.
This is an example of the current conditions on Gun Club where you don't necessarily have the fences, but these areas would not qualify for the 6-foot fences because they're not a side yard or a street side rear yard. So this area would be unaffected by this code change. This is on downtown by Davidson, so it's just south of Davidson, Fifth Avenue. So here's an example of this person has a 6-foot fence that technically doesn't meet code, but it would under this code change. Here's another example. This is down at the south end of town, right by the county border, and they have a situation where they have an extremely long lot that sticks out like a thumb, and it's like 60% frontage, and they can't put a tall fence in their front yard or the side yard, and technically their rear yard should only be 3 feet, but in this case, this is what brought this on, because the gang mailbox here, everybody in the entire neighborhood stops and looks in their back window and gets their stuff out of the mailbox and has free reign of everything that goes on in their entire yard and the back of their house with unobstructed views, because the sidewalk is about 3 feet taller. So even a 6-foot fence, so you can see that they have a 6-foot fence on top of the shorter fence, and it still doesn't do a lot for privacy, but it does a lot for security.
Seems like they're the ones who need the arborvitae.
And this one is actually right out in front of the police station right here, just right across the street. So it's an example of a 3-foot fence in the front yard and the side yard, but they transitioned to a 6-foot fence in what would be considered the rear yard, where it fronts a street. So this is the kind of product that you will continue to see, the high visibility front yard and corner, but their rear yard would be able to get the privacy and meet the city code. Here's another example of one directly across the street, where again you have the rear yard on a frontage that would have a 6-foot fence that transitions to a lower fence, so people have the sight distance around the corner. So this would continue to be allowed under the code change. And then of course this one, which is literally right outside our window, where they have a 6-foot that transitions to a 3-foot, and then they added some sight obscuring screening, which technically isn't allowed, but would be permitted under this code to give them a little more privacy in their backyard. As a matter of fact, they would theoretically be able to remove a large portion of this and actually have a 6-foot fence to ensure they have privacy in their backyard under the proposed code change. And then here's another one. This is heading down towards 503 from our location here, where you have a mix of rear yard with 6-foot fence, and then this person has a front yard. They would not be able to put in a 6-foot fence. They would be limited to a 3 or a 4-foot fence, because it's their front yard, and we don't want these tall fences framing in a front yard. And that's the same, this is Insel. You can see Insel has rear yards with 6-foot fences, and then this is a side yard with the 6-foot fence. And as you go down Insel, you get to Merriweather, where they have 6-foot fences because it's a rear yard, and they have a 6-foot side street, but the front yards don't have 6-foot fences in them. So we literally have examples of this all over town.
Okay. Great. Where did we, we talked about this a couple months ago, yeah? This isn't new. Did we?
Yeah.
I don't remember, but I missed a couple.
You don't remember this?
I don't think I was here.
He wasn't here.
But,
Oh.
but I don't,
Probably.
I mean, if we're discussing it, I don't have an issue with it.
We're not
If,
yet.
you know, people that live on multiple streets should be able to fence off a portion of their property, provided it doesn't cause an accident. Right? That's what, essentially your rules.
Okay, there's no applicant for this one, so I'm gonna skip straight to opening public testimony. Anyone wanna submit public comment on this? Please.
should ask Travis to go get more pictures.
Yeah, there you go. All right, in that case, I'm gonna close public testimony and we'll just chat about it. Do we want to, yeah. I think we should, they aren't separate hearings, but we can discuss them separately, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's, I guess I won't close public testimony. I'm gonna leave public testimony open.
I'd like to point out
Well,
that in
that's
his
the letter.
language, he says staff may approve. So if somebody came in with a plan for a fence made of old tires, they could still say no. So,
I suppose so. Yeah, where did we talked about this for a while.
We did,
We did.
yes.
I had a lot to say. I don't remember much of it now. Staff, do you remember what?
It seems to me that you got down to thinking that it made sense. I think you got hung up on the question of whether Hillshot, Insel, and Gun Club should be included in it. Because the 503 roads made sense,
Yeah.
but you weren't sure whether you were buying into those
Yeah.
three.
Yeah, I recall not wanting to add those. I think we were in general agreement on that, but we're allowed to change our minds too.
So why would we want to add them? Is there any reason?
It's probably a hopeless case, but trying to make 503 a pedestrian route, right? And these other roads, it would be nice to be able to walk on them. If there's already a lot of traffic there, if in addition you've got these barriers right up against the sidewalk, that just ends up being a miserable place to be. If you're not in a car, which granted most folks are, but not everybody is. And we're here to plan for everybody. So that's my concern. Putting these on a lot line in those circumstances seems like kind of a lot. I do recall we were talking about saying, okay, maybe allow like a 1-to-1 addition as you move away from the lot line. You recall that? So if now you're allowed 3 feet on the lot line, if you back it up 3 feet, then you can go to 6 feet.
Oh.
That's right.
And that feels like that kind of maybe would mitigate some of that kind of canyon feeling that strolling by these lots might create. Does that still accomplish? I mean, and it feels like it still accomplishes the goal of allowing privacy.
You're talking in the rear lot line?
Yeah. Just to.
but you're mandating that somebody gives up 3 feet of their property for the rights to have privacy. That's what you're asking.
Yeah.
Only if they want to do it with a fence. And
How else would you do that?
And
Well,
I-
I guess bushes, right?
I didn't arm wrestle them into buying that lot either.
Correct. But Fluffy can still get out under the bushes and get run over on a busy road too, so.
That's true. Put a leash on. Yeah, I don't know. Does that, and it could be a different ratio. We could say like, maybe 1 to 2, where you move back, or 1.5 to 1. Where you move back 2 feet, and then you can get to 6 feet. I'm open to that.
So on Insel Road,
Yeah.
back to Insel Road. There we go. I mean, in that case, there isn't that much backyard to begin with.
Again, yeah. I get it.
It already is a 6-foot fence.
Yeah.
But, in that case, if you were starting out with a fence,
Yeah, I just, I just don't feel like we can accommodate everybody's, like,
No.
questionable decisions for the past 30 years, right? Like,
No.
you know, I am sympathetic to people that have buildings placed on lots to where, you know, they don't have much space back there. But,
Could-
you know, that was someone's decision with the code at the time.
Could you make it contingent on the presence of street trees? So that there is some kind of break to the structure? Because this is a great example. If there were no street trees here, it would look like you're on the canyon of the Death Star,
Yeah, yeah, it's much better.
right?
Yeah. Public comment is still open, so if you want to come on up, I want to make you stand up.
Okay, that there is their
No, I'm gonna make it come all the way up here to the microphone so that everyone at home can hear you. You gotta pay for that.
Okay, so that residence on the right-hand side that's their chicken run.
Right.
And that's their side,
Right.
side
But
one.
I was
But-
focusing on what's on the left.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah, and
Because
the-
they've got a huge backyard and a side yard,
Right.
so, and they
Yeah,
have.
so there would be, you know, if they wanted to have a taller fence, they could
So-
potentially move their space.
So I live on Gun Club Road, and so nothing like any of that would apply to us.
Right. Thank you. So, yeah, I guess I would be amenable to, saying, put a tree in front of it to break it up. That works for me.
I'm sorry, one more time.
If put a tree there, you know, or a certain number of street trees. I like that. I guess I just, you know.
Actually, some shrubs would be nice and screen the fence a little bit more, but okay.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, some sort of like landscaping.
And unfortunately, in the right-of-way, we don't have any standards or anything except for street trees.
Okay, then let's make it street trees. How are we doing on that? Didn't we retain an arborist to give us a new list of street trees too?
So I can actually answer this. We have actually updated our permitted street tree list. I know our Public Works Department actually worked really hard on it, and it was done with the advice of a local arborist.
All right.
So
Fantastic. Okay. Great. So, how are we feeling about this one? Kind of.
I'm okay as it's written. I know that you want to add some stuff to it, so I'll let you start the ball rolling. I'm not against it necessarily. I just don't want to limit people's freedom to fence in their backyards when it's not going to cause an accident.
Yeah. Okay.
That's just my position.
Gotcha. As far as just sort of mechanics here, do we need to, since we've only got one agenda item here, do we need to wait till the end to?
I'll keep notes, and then you can just make a motion as
Okay.
directed.
Okay. And I would prefer if we can split it up into two motions so that I can vote on most of them, and I'll stay out of the
Sprinklers.
sprinkler one.
It's up to-
Okay. You guys ready to move on to?
Yep.
Next one? All right.
Okay, and while I was in this code section, I noticed that, to give you a look, that there is a cross-reference to subsection K. And actually, when I started doing the research, it should say J, not K. So this is just a quick one-letter change. And it's referencing a site distance requirement section
Okay.
that was renumbered at one point.
Anybody want to make public comment about J versus K? I know people have preferences on these things. All right, I think we can move on. Good catch, thank you.
Okay. So the next one is, has to do with ADA ramps in setbacks. And the idea is in the low-density residential zones, there are certain exceptions to setbacks, like in the front yard. And I would like to add the ramps for ADA access to existing residences when in a required front, side, or rear yard, that such exempt ramp structures must meet the building code, fire code, and required lot coverage standard is not exceeded, but they should be allowed in the front, in the setbacks. because it's just simple mechanics of if you have an elevated door and you need to build a ramp, you're not likely to get it to the ground without being in a setback. And given the aging population, we should make an exception to our setbacks for ADA ramps.
What's wrong with this one, Tel?
Nothing's wrong with this one. I know the last, thank you. I've earned that.
Okay, what's wrong with it is that you have is instead of if again. Is the slide different than the actual code?
Yeah, currently your front porch has to meet setbacks.
No, I'm talking about the if versus is.
Which one? In
The what?
Okay, well, you said, so is this slide the exact wording?
Yes.
Because
Yes, so
again,
it is an exemption.
it should be if and not is.
No, it's saying must meet building code. Oh, I see. Such.
Must need,
Yeah, it's a little bit.
If-
That does need to change somehow.
the is doesn't make sense at the end of the, next to the last line.
The required lot coverage standard is not exceeded.
Such example must meet building and require.
So it
So
is,
the standard must not be exceeded, I guess would be. So yeah, you're missing a.
Something's missing out of it.
okay.
There's a part of speech missing there. So it's
Okay.
as far as content, it's fine, but as far as
Maybe I'll
grammar,
just
it's-
rewrite that sentence to make
Please.
more sense.
Yes.
Okay. But in theory,
I have no
okay.
Yeah, we're good.
problems with the, yeah.
The one thing I remember from this last time is, and it's kind of a wish list item, I guess, is that I think would be really cool, and maybe this is something to get Sick Tracy on for like a grant. If we had like a design library that says, here's a really nice, or like 2 or 3 really nice looking ADA ramps that we have plans for, and you can just have for free, and you don't have to think about whether they meet code or not, because we already know that. I think that's probably, you folks are very talented, but probably beyond your expertise to put together, but I think there's precedent for that elsewhere, and I think it's a cool idea.
Yeah. I'll call around. I'm sure Lowe's probably has something out of the box for their
They may, yeah.
contractor's desk.
Does that have to be part of the state code? 'Cause we put a ramp in.
No.
And it had certain dimensions and lengths and stuff that it had to meet. And I'm not sure what code that followed, but there are codes for that.
So the ADA code is spelled out in the building code.
Okay.
And what we're saying here is that should be more important than,
We do want to prevent this being used to just build a sweep deck into the setbacks. So maybe I'm a little too cynical, but it seems like there's an opening there for skirting some other rules.
yeah. So this actually came up once before, and they had to extend the deck to meet the minimum size for the ADA landing.
Yeah,
And
that
that's,
makes perfect sense.
that's why this came up.
Okay. I just don't want somebody saying their landing needs to be 40 by 40.
Yeah.
It's an ADA ramp, so we can do it. Okay. Cool. Well, I think we all like that one.
That's fine.
Yep.
Move ahead.
Okay, so the next change is from Title 16 for subdivisions. The language that we proposed in the staff report, and these are just simply 1 or 2 word changes, and specifically what it says is we're requiring electronic copies, not all paper, that they're no longer required to submit a Mylar. So a Mylar is essentially a plastic that doesn't break down, so it's a long-term storage format. Removal of references to India ink, which is essentially a long-living, non-fading type of ink, and then clarification of 1632 applicability, and clarification that subdivisions are administered by our Community Development Department, not our Public Works Department, because back a decade ago, there was no community development department, so those are just mostly just find and replace public works with community development.
Well, I'm just from a nostalgia. I'm sad about this, but it's the right thing to do. I never got to sign it my way. That was
Change.
Dave's favorite part of the job.
Change.
Yeah. All right, I think we can
Any income? Okay.
move ahead.
And then in Title II, the City Council section, it should be changed to reflect the new location of council chambers. The code specifically says 100 Davidson is where the council chambers are, and it should be changed to read 200 Scott, which is where we are today. So it's just an address change.
Looks good.
The Title 17 for zoning, there are 2 small corrections, and they are specifically spelling and grammar mistakes.
I
Or
won't believe you until Sharon reads it.
corrections.
She's rubbing off on you. Yeah, good info.
And then this is a new one that was first brought to you at the workshop, and specifically the issue that is in this code. It's language proposed for the designation of safety zones, essentially all those yellow curbs out in the community. We paint them because they are safety zones, but our code does not recognize that you can't park in a safety zone. So if you're out there in the community today and there's a yellow curb, you can park there all you want, and
Keep
even
this
though it's a
quiet,
safety
everyone. Don't go
hazard,
spreading that around.
it's not against the law to do it. So we're trying to fix that so
Yet.
that people will respect those, and the police can actually write you a ticket for parking unsafe. No, not, when the council, it's 5 days after the council buys off on it, yes.
Okay, so that really impacts the library because everybody's parks in the yellow.
And so this is probably the one that's probably the most contentious, and that is the fire sprinkler language that our code currently has a language that says proposed buildings over 5,000 square feet require sprinklers. And when the city adopts the building and fire codes, the city has the authority to be more restrictive. So that standard is not in the codes. But for fire protection and public safety purposes, the city has drawn the line at 5,000 square foot structures. And in this case, the applicant, or Columbia River Carbonates, who it's a city, a business here in the city, and they were building structures which are non-combustible materials that the structure is built out of. And then the material that they process in that building is a non-combustible material. And they have submitted a letter that's in the record, and we've discussed this before, that they would like an exception added to our code that says 5,000 square foot structures unless it is a C2 or an S2. F2 or a S2, which is a storage of material. Let's see. And in this case, their argument is if it's a non-combustible building and the materials in the building can't catch on fire, then you don't need a sprinkler system because it will never catch on fire. And Clark County Fire Rescue was at the workshop, and they brought their opinion, and they're here if you want to provide any particular question. So in this case, Columbia River Carbonates is here, but they are not technically an applicant, just like Clark County Fire Rescue is not actually a decision maker in this decision. It is city code.
All right, you guys maybe have some chat on that.
Okay.
Step out for a second. Let me know when you're done.
Does anybody have any initial thoughts on that?
No, it makes sense to me.
Do you have any? Okay, I'll open it up for anybody in the audience that has any concerns about this, or you'd like to make a comment. Now's your time. You don't have to if you don't want to. I mean, I'm just giving you the opportunity.
My name is Mark Holmberg. I'm a project engineer at Columbia River Carbonates. Been there for 16 years. And just a little history. We've been there, of course, since '85. And we've built many structures, many buildings over the years. And historically, we've asked for waivers on this code because of what Travis described, and we've been granted those waivers over the years, and it hasn't been an issue.
And these waivers were discussed with the fire chief.
Yes, and I think
third
Mike
party.
was part of those discussions over the years. If I'm
Yeah, dating back to 2010.
10, Larry Shattuck, I think, maybe worked with you on some of that, but. So instead of us asking every time we have a new project, and we have actually several new ones coming up in the pipeline that would be impacted by this in a fairly significant way, instead of asking for waivers every time, we thought we could maybe get the code adjusted to be more in line with IBC, which already has some of these waivers in them. And I brought with me Josh Carstairs. He's with JHI Engineering. He has a little bit more information on the IBC and how that relates and what other jurisdictions have done already for this.
Can I ask you a quick question
Yeah,
before
sure.
you hand it over?
Yeah.
You get inspected, don't you, periodically?
Oh, yeah.
The fire marshal?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Hi.
Hello.
Josh Carstairs, professional engineer with JHI Engineering. We're out of Portland, Oregon, but we have an office in Klamath too. We support up and down I-5 corridor. I designed several of their previous projects and was quite surprised by your requirement for fire sprinklers at 5,000 square feet regardless of use. IBC usually controls that. They assign fire sprinklers for all sorts of different reasons, mostly on what the building's made out of and the uses that happen in there, how hazardous the uses are. In this case, CRC has a F2 occupancy and an S2. That's just fancy language for factory low hazard or storage low hazard. Some examples of other factory low hazards are they're essentially non-combustible goods: bricks, foundries, glass, ice, stuff that just doesn't catch on fire. S2 uses, that's low hazard storage. Again, you're talking about storage of asbestos, beverages, chalk, crayons, glass, metals, mirrors, washers and dryers. This stuff just doesn't catch on fire. Just when I read your fire code, you guys have a local fire code. It is the one that requires fire sprinklers at 5,000 square feet or larger. It already has a carve-out inside of it. It has a carve-out, it says here, so I'm reading, I can give you the exact reference. This is State Fire Code 14.32.620. It reads, if building is over 5,000 square feet or greater, I'm skipping past, blah, blah, blah. The requirement shall not apply to covered play areas or similar open structures where no equipment is stored. My understanding is that carve-out would be there for like a, a sports court at a school or something, a covered play area, where again, the risk to a fire is very, very low. It makes sense to me that you'd have a similar level of hazard if you took that same play area and just piled a pile of gravel inside of it, right? Or any non-combustible item. It seems about the same hazard. So to me, there's a very little risk of adding an additional carve-out here for these types of buildings. Again, I would request a non-combustible construction and non-combustible materials being manufactured in the factory or stored there. And again, this would provide CRC an exemption from your local requirements, but they would still be held to the IBC. And again, IBC has lots of requirements for when fire sprinklers happen. If they added some additional buildings that were more hazardous, or they had higher level occupancies, people in there, higher level things, then fire sprinklers would be required by IBC, but just they would be exempted from your blanket 5,000 square foot coverage. And right now, any building that's 5,000 square feet just requires sprinklers. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I take it IBC is International Building Code?
Yes.
Oh, yeah,
I
so
mean,
sorry.
you know.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. Building code,
Yeah.
yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
How do you spell your last name?
Oh, it's Car Stairs, C-A-R, yeah.
That's what I just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Uh-huh.
If I may.
Please.
Mike Jackson, Clark Howlett's Fire Rescue. And a lot of what you heard is accurate. So the International Building Code and International Fire Code are broadly accepted minimum standard codes that are adopted. States, municipalities oftentimes provide more restrictive sections to the code, like we're talking about with the 5,000 square foot sprinkler ordinance that I'm not sure when it came. I know it was in place in 2010 and after that. A couple of the examples, open structures, that would also apply. So if it was an open structure with a pile of non-combustible stuff under it, open structure meaning just a roof, then that would not require fire sprinklers. It's when you enclose a structure and you put walls around it, it's a little bit complicated.
Can I ask a clarifying question?
Oh, yes, absolutely.
I hate to interrupt, that's rude of me. When you say adopted, that means on a state level?
The 5,000 square foot ordinance is adopted specifically for Woodland. It's
Okay.
consistent with, it's a fairly common threshold in some communities. I couldn't name all of them for you. I know, so like Camas has a 100% sprinkler ordinance, so they sprinkler all buildings of any size effectively. I know Vancouver has a threshold. I don't know off the top of my head what it is. Ridgefield, Woodland, La Center all have the same 5,000 square foot.
So it's not out of whack from anything else then? Okay.
Yeah, there are places that don't have that and follow the minimum standards. From the fire protection standpoint, obviously our mission on the top seems relatively simple, where we protect life and property. It's somewhat nuanced and layered on how we do that. And part of that protecting life and property goes into things like business continuity and making sure that not only do we protect the property when things are impacted by fire, hopefully folks can return back to that home sooner with less damage. Businesses can be back in business, back in operation, that sort of thing. And aside from responding to the emergencies, fire protection in itself is kind of a community insurance policy. The community pools their money together to provide the resources so that we're there whenever anyone needs us. Part of that is managing how we deploy those resources where they are. Obviously in a smaller area, we have fewer resources that are further spread out than they are in a more urban area. Woodland's a little bit unique for the size of the community and the number and variety of industries that we have. There's a lot of communities this size that do not have near the industrial base that Woodland does. Right. Larger buildings, industrial base pose a bigger, more complicated hazard, a more complex response, oftentimes due to just building size in general. If you're going to take tools, equipment, hose lines, people inside, the bigger the building, the more complex that operation becomes just in and of itself. Right. Even when you're looking at high rack storage and that sort of thing.
Right, how high you're piling stuff.
Right,
for sure.
From the insurance side, part of what we provide too, so as you may or may not be aware, the Washington Survey and Ratings Bureau is an independent ratings bureau set up by the state that works with the Department of Insurance to provide information that then property insurance rates are based on. A couple of things they look at is they have like the building code effectiveness grade. They call it the BKEG score. They look at building and fire codes, what codes you have in place, whether they're the state minimum, whether they're more restrictive, are those codes enforced? And they look at that to help assess the risk in the community and then apply classes to that city on then how insurance rates are applied across the city. In addition to that, they assess our fire protection resources, the water supply system, available water hydrants, hydrant spacing, hydrant maintenance, from the fire department, training, equipment, staffing, all of that kind of stuff goes in together, which provides a protection class in addition to the BCAGs. That then impacts insurance rates. So part of the insurance rates that we enjoy are because of proactive measures like the sprinkler ordinance, our staffing, and those sorts of things that all play into that. And on that, with our taxpayer support, and we've had our EMS levy brought some additional people that are also trained as firefighters. So one of the things we're pleased about is effective in October, our protection class actually improves by a score. We're going from a protection class 5 to a protection class 4, which we'll be able to publicly announce more broadly in October. That'll have a positive impact on people's insurance rates. And we start.
That'll actually affect the rates we're paying? Anything is going to be less expensive.
It is. That is also nuanced. It depends on the carrier and all of those different things. But it is a piece of how they predict rates. And it absolutely, for some people, you can't say all because people have all different insurance coverage. But for a large number of people, it will positively impact their insurance rates, which are regulated by the state. So the state will dictate how they set the rates. And when those rates are based off those scores and those scores improve, then the insurance companies have to charge the rates that were approved by the state. So it will positively impact property insurance rates. So obviously with that, we have concerns anytime we look at taking steps backwards with codes and that could affect the broader community for insurance rates and that sort of thing. From a response standpoint, like I say, we have fewer resources than you would in other areas that oftentimes have industrial areas, whether that's Vancouver, Portland, whatever. We have more resources, a lot closer together, can provide a quicker response with those resources. So that's one of the things we look at in addition to our firefighter safety. On the outset, a non-combustible building that processes non-combustible goods, sure, what could happen? The challenge is oftentimes those goods are packaged in or on combustible containers. They're oftentimes moved with vehicles, forklifts operated by propane, batteries, battery charging stations for those forklifts. Sometimes there are racks, wooden pallets, offices, furnishings, equipment like that also add to that potential fire load. And you get in a large building, even just a forklift fire with presumably non-combustible washers and dryers that are packaged in cardboard boxes on racks can still become a pretty significant incident, and whereas our response isn't as robust as other areas that have the kind of industrial base that we do, that's part of our concern and part of the reason for having the fire sprinkler ordinance in place the way it is. So our recommendation would be to not paint with a broad brush, to remove the sprinkler ordinance for the F2 and S2 and open that broad swath to anyone in any of those occupancies to eliminate sprinklers. Because of those things, like I say, talking about the packaging and the other things beside just the commodity. Right.
Giving them a waiver or like a temporary waiver, is that?
And we, as they discussed, we have worked with them on their projects and where they have unique things. Even some of the challenges with that is the building code doesn't say you can't put it on wooden pallets, you can't have it in plastic bags, you can't use forklifts, that sort of thing. So if we impose those kind of restrictions because things aren't sprinkled, it becomes a little bit of a labor issue too with trying to enforce that. Whereas once you build the building and it's sprinklered, yes, you have to inspect it and do those things. But to follow up about specific business practices and exactly what you're storing where and what kind of packaging you're using, whether that changes with the market or anything else, becomes a little bit more complex to try to manage. And it doesn't necessarily fit well with that building code effectiveness score, because we say, well, we don't have this, but trust us, we look at it and make sure that they're right.
Let me ask, did you have any follow-up?
Well, so did you say the waiver was a good idea or not?
And we work with any folks that come in and look at if they have special circumstances. Like one of the main processes at Columbia River Carbonates, they have a large building that it's not even storage, it is truly just processing. So you have metal equipment that is processing non-combustible product. There is pretty little risk there. but we look at that different than we would, say, storage of materials and that sort of thing. So it one-off, but we certainly will work with folks and look at if a variance is an option. Variances are options. Folks can look at what the code refers to as alternate methods and means. So how do we accomplish the same thing through a different way and afford the same degree of risk protection?
What's your period of validity for? I mean, do you have to do that every year?
Well, we look at it at the time the buildings.
You have to do that.
Well, for the buildings, we look at it at the time the building's constructed. If they're looking at a variance from the fire building code. For inspections, about just are they maintaining systems and process and are aisles
So it's a
clear and
one-time
that sort of
only variance review?
thing. Yes, for building a building and whether it's going to have sprinklers or not. It becomes a challenge because if things change aside from that original agreement, hopefully we catch that on a routine fire inspection. But if it's something that's not a standard thing that you look for everywhere, that becomes challenging and say, oh, yes, we made one exception for this one place and we should check that every third year when we're there to take a look. So that's where we try to keep those to a minimum.
Do you know off the top of your head, is it a prohibitive fee that's involved with that, or?
There's not fees specifically for the variance. They apply for a permit and a permit fee, but that's regardless of whether they have an exception to that. And inspection fees are regardless of that as well. When we perform an inspection, the program's mostly self-supporting, so folks pay an inspection fee when we come perform an inspection.
Right, that's required.
Right.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Yeah, thank you.
Appreciate you coming in. Sharon, did you have any other questions for Mike? No. Does anybody else have any input you'd like to add on the subject? Okay, we'll close, by all means.
Mike did mention the process building where we have just metal equipment and concrete floors and we're processing non-combustibles. Exceptions could be made for things like that. Is that what I understood? Okay, so one of the projects that we have coming up is a new process building, very similar to, I think, one you're probably familiar with. It's 4 or 5, 50 feet tall, several floors, all concrete, all steel. Essentially the same design as a building that we received a waiver on before. In discussions recently with Travis and David, it almost sounded like if we proceeded with this project and we weren't granted a waiver, that not only would we have to sprinkle the new building, but anything adjacent within 10 feet? Is that right? 10 or 20 feet?
Is that maybe because you were talking about an addition to an existing
No,
structure?
it would
or
be
it's
a
separate.
separate building structurally, but it would be shoehorned in, but the problem is it's real close to existing buildings that don't have sprinklers, and retrofitting those would essentially kill the project.
Separate buildings generally either have setbacks and aggressive, or if you don't have required setback, even a rated or fire resistant wall on the outside continues to be done to address that. So I don't know of any circumstances where sprinklers in a building have required sprinklers within an adjacent building.
Okay, all right. So the building I'm referring to at 50 feet tall actually had a structural engineer look at this, and the construction of a firewall that tall it would have to be independently supported. This wouldn't work. And so in that case, we have to sprinkle the new building because it's over 5,000 square feet. We're within 10 feet of an existing structure that's 30,000 square feet and multiple floors. I mean, we'd have to install a fire main that's 12-inch in diameter around the perimeter of our property, tied into the water main, just to feed all these sprinkler heads. So like I said, I mean, something like that would probably kill the project.
This hasn't been the findings yet of this extra review. This is just
No, these are
fears that you have that could happen.
Yes, and it's
Okay.
just kind of inputs that we've received, and we're starting to piece together if we can even proceed with this.
By no means, I mean, I want to defer to the expertise of the fire personnel and engineers and such, but just from my layman's point of view, you got an exemption from the previous building for putting sprinklers in it.
Okay.
What would lead you to believe that you would suddenly have to
Okay.
now, based on the alternate means and methods review he's talking about? Right?
Okay, all right, I just wanted to
I mean,
confirm that was.
I'm not guaranteeing an outcome, don't
Sure,
think that.
I understand that.
But I mean, if,
Schedule plan review has plans, but I'm
Right.
pretty confident if it's a separate building, even if it doesn't have the sort of setbacks, it could be mitigated in a reasonable way.
Okay, all right, that's all I was looking for.
great.
Okay, thank you.
Did anyone want to have further conversation about this or move forward? Okay. I can go ahead and start. You don't have to agree with me. I think, I appreciate the folks from Columbia Carbonate coming down, but I do trust the fire department personnel. I do think they serve a valuable service as being a third party, inspector, and they know this stuff much better than I do, right? I shouldn't be writing code for this stuff. If it's in a reasonable exception review process, then I think it should be fine to leave that and not adopt the extra language that says combustible storage and combustible building, because I do think that paints in a broad brush. Not every square peg fits in a square hole. I like the idea of the fire department or the fire marshal determining the situations or rounding corners when they need to. So I move that we adopt the language as is. That's fine.
Yeah, I agree.
You mean, leave the language as is.
Right, without adding an
Yeah.
exception for all non-combustible structures with non-combustible storage. It sounds like fire department, to me anyway, from what I heard, it sounded like fire personnel are supportive of waiving that, but they just want an opportunity to look at it and make that decision.
Yeah. Is that reasonable?
Can I actually say something just
Sure.
based on my experience with the last review? I think one of the challenges that we ran into with the last review and in the past is that having that 5,000 square foot in our code, it can be a challenge because it comes back and forth on can we do the waiver, do we have to do a full developers agreement. I think perhaps if there was something that allows the fire department to make that in our code formally to allow the fire department to make that waiver, some language of unless specifically waived by the
Travis,
fire
do you agree
department,
would be
that
a
might make it
tool for
easier.
staff? To add.
That is
something
an
about
option,
exemption?
but we also really should be fundamentally having the question about should we be sitting down with Columbia River Carbonate and looking at the next 20 years, and if we can lay down a developer's agreement that says if you continue to process and you meet this, and this guideline, and they can live with the fact that it's a steel building with steel equipment in it, and they're gonna not change to processing, wood chips, then there's no damage, there's no reason why the city couldn't lay down parameters where it would accept Columbia River Carbonate, because they are such an exception that warrants a one-on-one agreement that lasts for the 10 buildings that they're thinking about for the next 10
So
years.
would you rather table this question while you revise your language to give yourself that tool and give them and thereby giving them the exemption that they need, I think? I think
Well,
that appeases both parties.
I mean, that's realistically something that we could talk about anyways, whether this gets approved or not. That's, entirely up to the council. So,
So the fire department, that takes them out of the equation. Am I understanding that correctly?
no, I think it would be an agreement between the Columbia River Carbonates and the city that, provided they address all of the fire marshal's concerns, and they show that they meet the building code, that this is how we would treat them from now on.
Okay.
If I
Yes,
may.
Mike, please.
I think to Trevor's point, I think what he's driving at is if we adopt the code without the modifications, keep the language the same as it is, a development agreement could be formed between the city and Cumberland Department. Technically, the way that fire district works, as a fire district, we actually don't have any code authority. Because we have the expertise, we have an arrangement with the city where we essentially enforce the fire code on their behalf. We have a great relationship with the city, so this would be, they would involve us in that developers agreement, and we would come to a mutual agreement. It would be between the city and Cumberland Department.
These options are in the code right now.
Technically,
Do all these.
without, developers agreement would not require any change.
Okay, cool.
Is that fair, Trev?
Yeah. So for example, if they have a building that is approved without sprinklers, rather than redesigning the wheel every time it comes in, if they just build the same building 3 or 4 times next to each other, then the expectation should be that, we don't need to have this discussion every time. It should be, as long as you're building the same thing and you're meeting the same parameters, it should be assumed that,
And that's all possible under the language as is.
yep.
Okay, so I'm gonna rescind my motion previously. It might be the same, but, my new motion is to adopt the language as written, without the additional language as requested,
So to make no change?
to make no change.
I
Okay.
second.
You wanna have a vote on it then?
Yes.
Robin Zorich,
Aye.
Brian Mattson,
Aye.
Sharon Watt.
Aye.
And for the record, that's a recommendation that's going to the city council. So the city council will hear this at probably their October 2nd hearing. Luckily, we're very close to being done. Our code enforcement officer needs to be able to do mosquito control enforcement. Yes. I'm sorry?
Up there in B, it says the county may act to abate the nuisance.
Yes.
Yes, but so the county is going to be
So that-
abating the nuisance in the
No,
city?
well, no, so the intention is to convert this to city language
Yes.
and put city in there. And our code enforcement will pursue it, and technically we are part of the county mosquito control board, so they may do the work. enforcement of a nuisance. Language. Okay, and then the last change is to Title I, or General Provisions Code, and specifically notices are required to be posted at several locations in the city, and it includes the Old National Bank, and we no longer have an Old National Bank, so I would recommend that you replace that with the Woodland Police Department, so the three posting locations are the City Hall, Post Office, and Mount Police Station. No.
Decision if it's a blight.
Code enforcement officer would theoretically figure out whether or not it's enforceable, and then it would go to the code enforcement, or the hearings examiner who would issue the notices.
I move that we adopt the language, but strike the blights on the landscape. Unless you can tell me what you're trying to capture by blight.
Well, let's do
Do
it.
you have a picture?
I don't know.
Is that what that is?
He's just copying. Let's try to do, that's the last one. Can we do a motion for everything else in? You want to do all that one? The whole. Yeah, I was there a lot of muddling, wasn't it? So we took care of one, part 60. Yeah, and
First one had the most
the fences.
Oh, are we already done with the first part, the
Fences were.
zoning? We're already done.
Oh, yeah.
That's right, okay. I move that we adopt the fence language. The ADA ramps, I want those to be exempted from setbacks, as I support the code as written. And then the nuisances as written with the exception of blights on the landscape.
Okay, what about?
As directed for the notes I took.
I didn't hear that.
As directed for any changes and adjustments that you discussed during your approval. Am I getting that right?
There's also.
Yes, sorry, yes.
And the spelling correction.
Would that happen tonight? I don't know.
Okay.
Second.
All right, motion has been made and seconded, and then. Any additional discussion? Roll vote.
Karen Watt. Robin George. Ted Benson.
Aye.
Brian Mattson.
Dan, Jody?
You're welcome. We thought we did it, but then we haven't had another meeting since then, and for some reason it didn't touch it, so, but we went back and changed things, so. So, and then it comes up like in a